Thank you so much, Rick, for that kind and incredibly generous introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here at Rockefeller among so many lively, innovative minds. And I want to thank the members of the selection committee for the great honor of being asked to participate tonight in this prestigious event celebrating the distinguished scientist, Dr. Svetlana Mojsov, for her extraordinary achievements in biomedical research, as well as her inspiring career. I also want to thank the renowned sculptor, Ursula von Riedingsvard, and her husband, the late Paul Greengard, for establishing a prize to recognize the momentous, often life-changing contributions of women in science. I'm especially delighted that the award comes from the shared heart of a couple who bridge the arts and sciences themselves. I've spent some of the happiest hours of my life on that uniquely fascinating Escher-like bridge, even though it makes it nearly impossible to know what to say when I'm asked, "What are your books about?" To make it simple, I usually say I'm a nature writer. And that is true, but only if what we mean by nature is the full sum of creation, from the Big Bang to the whole shebang, from the invisibly distant to the invisibly minute. And such common marvels as owl moths with stunning eyes on their hind wings, whales using rhyme to remember their epic songs, spring moving north at 13 miles a day, the harvest moon rising like slow thunder, mirage-like mosaic octopuses, memories wobbling aspic, the night sky's distant leak of suns, an aging father's voice so husky it could pull a sled, the courtship pantomimes of albatrosses, raindrops shape-shifting 300 times a second as they fall, and of course, the several hundred tardigrades that I keep as fascinating and indomitable pets. In short, nature, homesteading every pore and crevice of Earth with endless variations on such basic biological themes as tree frogs, hairy frogs, frogs with sticky toes, marsupial frogs, toe-tapping frogs, and even transparent glass frogs. I grew up in rural Illinois in the jet-propelled 50s, basking in the novelty of black and white television, but of course minus computers and cell phones. So I mainly played outside, and nothing delighted me more than to be up to my shoulders inside a tree trunk, or watching all the things that squirrels do with their tails. It amazed me then, and it still does, how many marvels are bustling through any slender moment. All the textures of life, all the sensations of being alive. I found nature a limitless source of surprises, spectacles, and wonder. That's where I first felt a sense of belonging to the pervasive mystery of nature, of being finite in the face of the infinite, and where I developed the wellsprings of a secular eco-spirituality. Yes, and became an earth ecstatic. But I also developed a sense of mission. More than anything, I wanted somehow to portray all of those sensations, all of those physical details, the whole big, blooming, buzzing experience of being alive. By the time I was 14, I was trying to capture small shards and sticky fragments of the world in words by writing poems. And I desperately wanted one day to be a sort of scientist poet who patrolled the wilds of the world and the emotional jungle of ourselves with snares made of sentences and darts tipped in the curare of wonder. I also sometimes fantasized about being part of an itinerant band of extraterrestrial artists who visited different solar systems and were reborn into each one, creating art as one sentient life form after another. Their home planet boasted a library which contained the lamplit sagas unique senses and contrapuntal natures of many civilizations and entities. This time around, I just happened to be a human on a sunny blue marble in our curve of space. Then when I was 17, I was paging through the local newspaper when I came upon a tiny article which matter-of-factly reported that scientists had discovered that schizophrenics' sweat smells different from other people's. Well, I was astonished. Was it really possible that mind, personality, mood, and other phantoms could in fact be physical, something in a person's unique broth? I was tantalized by the thought and applied to Boston University to study neuroscience while also writing. But when, for various reasons, I transferred colleges to Penn State as a sophomore, just as Rick said, the computer put me in English by mistake. And since I'd been writing shyly but enthusiastically my whole life, and I wasn't very old, I considered it fate. One afternoon, when I was a senior, I was listening to Gustav Holst's gorgeous musical suite, The Planets. I was enthralled by its lyrical flights, but I was also puzzled by our human need to turn the planet Mars into a war god and Venus into a femme fatale in order to appreciate them. I'd been reading general science books and magazines for fun, and the real planets with their bizarre atmospheres and their mysterious terrains completely enchanted me. Why weren't we able to appreciate them and the rest of nature as it physically is? Why did we have to only be able to mythologize them or domesticate them? So I began planning a book-length suite of poems based on the science of the planets. Alas, this was far from popular when I entered Cornell a few months later as a graduate student in creative writing. One day, the senior literary critic took me aside and said with sincere, avuncular concern, "What's a nice girl like you doing writing about amino acids?" "Science has no heart," he said, "no feelings." Well, I guess he didn't know many scientists. I tried to explain that I didn't think the world was knowable from just one perspective, and that I took the universe literally as one verse, that the whole big, buzzing, blooming spectacle of life fascinated me, and that since we live in a world where neurons, viruses, airfoils, and yes, amino acids were such a common part of our everyday lives, not to write about them would mean perversely ignoring so much of life's wonders and variety. He just shook his head and walked away. I was a hopeless case. But luckily, I was able to put on my MFA and PhD committees A.R. Ammons, a poet whose background was in glass chemistry, and Carl Sagan, astronomer who loved the arts. They ran interference for me and made it possible to pursue an interdisciplinary MFA and PhD, technically in English, while poaching in the sciences. Thanks to Carl, I was also able to pore over NASA photos and maps, attend planetary flybys, and enter the Journalist in Space project, which, of course, was canceled after the Challenger tragedy. And by the way, I was among the semifinalists in that. All of the men were photographed looking forward, looking strong. All of the women were asked to pose in a kind of high school yearbook way. That's how our photos were taken. An especially fascinating and fun course that I taught at Cornell was on creativity in the arts and sciences. It was a class full of academic misfits like me. I remember one student who wished to join the class saying, "I'm in high-energy physics, but my real passion is for medieval Irish song." I said, "Great, you're in." I also began joining expeditions then to work with endangered animals, trying to contribute in some small way to their survival, hands-on, but also by writing about them, mainly for the New Yorker and National Geographic and in several books. Much has happened in my writerly life since then. I continue to write books of poetry and poetic prose, and I feel so grateful to have a calling that allows me to create my own astonishment. Writing is also the way that I keep learning about the world, because I admit it, I just love being a student. I'd hate to give that up. And that may inspire me to write about the mystery and marvel of the brain, or the Anthropocene, or a natural history of love, or the dark night of the soul, or the compassionate heroism of Antonina Żabinska, the zookeeper's wife, during World War II, or the book I'm working on now about how much our sensory lives have changed since I published A Natural History of the Senses in 1990. Since then, in all of my books, I like to focus on a facet of nature we view too narrowly and try to demystify it, clarify it, give it a human face, imagine it in new ways, celebrate its richness and variety. What I find most fascinating is writing at that crossroads where nature and human nature meet and can shed light on each other. But my books are all part of the same lifelong quest to somehow make the world sayable and to better understand what it was like to have once been alive on this planet. How did it feel in our senses, passions, and contemplations? What did it taste like, look like, smell like, hurt like, yearn like, thrill like? In retrospect, it seems like everything I've written thus far is part of a single mosaic that I could never finish, but which, if I could, would help me better understand the complex saga of human experience. Deep down, I know that that should take from birth to death, at least, and include all of consciousness. So I suppose I should find that overwhelming. But I just don't picture it in that way in terms of success or goal, but rather as a simple mystery trip. The world revealing itself, human nature revealing itself, are so seductive and startling, and that's always been fascinating enough to send words down my spine. Thank you.